Hello, and welcome to the Menopause Weight Loss Coach. Today, we're going to talk about menopause. We're going to look at what menopause actually is, what causes menopause, and some of the symptoms and long term health consequences that you can get during menopause. We're then going to have a look at treatments, so medical treatments available, then have a look at some foods that you can eat that may help during menopause, and go on to look at some supplementation. So, if we start with menopause and what it actually is, so every woman at some point will go through the menopause, and it's basically where your ovaries stop producing eggs or reduce producing eggs as you go through your fertile life. And basically, what happens during that period is that your hormones start to fluctuate quite wildly. So, your estrogen, your progesterone, and your FSH will fluctuate quite wildly. And this is what can give you a lot of the symptoms. And this is a transition phase, which is called the perimenopause. You're actually classed as being postmenopause when you haven't had a period for 12 months. And you'll find that during perimenopause, your periods will start to change. They may get longer, they may get shorter, they may get heavier. There's a lot of fluctuation in there, and every woman is different. So, after having not had a period for 12 months, you would be classed as being postmenopausal. Now, if you get to 11 months and then you have a period, you're not postmenopausal, and you have to go back to square one and count again from day one to 12 months, and then you will be postmenopausal. So during menopause, what actually happens is we've said the ovaries stop producing eggs or reduce producing eggs, and this affects the hormones estrogen and progesterone. The one that we're more focused on is estrogen, and the reason for that is that most of the symptoms that we see are actually caused by estrogen deficiency. So, estrogen is produced by the ovaries, it's also produced by fat cells, and it's produced in the adrenal glands to a smaller extent. The main estrogen is formed from the ovaries. And estrogen isn't just a sex hormone, it actually affects lots of different parts of the body. So that's why we get so many different symptoms, such as hot flushes and night sweats. We can get irritability, low mood, depression, anxiety, and then we can get cardiovascular symptoms, palpitations. We can get changes in our vaginal dryness, painful sexual intercourse. There's lots of different symptoms that people actually experience during menopause, perimenopause. And the reason for that is because there are estrogen receptors all over the body. So we have them in the brain, we have them in the heart, we have them in the bones and the joints. And a lot of people do actually complain of having very sore joints and such like during menopause. So those are the symptoms that we can feel and that we can see, but there are also some long-term health consequences associated with menopause and with the lowering of estrogen. Now, one thing that we know with cardiovascular disease is that women are much less prone to cardiovascular disease until the age of 50, when that actually changes. And women over the age of 50 are much more prone to cardiovascular disease. And this is because estrogen is actually cardioprotective. So when the estrogen starts to deplete, we get more problems with cardiovascular symptoms, and that can lead to cardiovascular problems. And it actually becomes equal with men, with women over the age of 50. So that's one of the long term consequences of menopause. Another one, which is quite widely known, is bone mineral density. So, estrogen is also responsible for turnover of bone, and as it depletes, the turnover of bone becomes less and less, and bone mineral density can really be affected, particularly in the later stages of menopause. So, one thing that women have to really look after is their bones. Another thing that can be affected is muscles. So as we age generally, we lose muscle tone and we lose some lean muscle. During menopause, this is actually accentuated. So in the long term, we can lose a considerable amount of muscle. So those are the long-term health consequences. There's also the fact of the genital urinary syndrome, and that is affecting the vagina and the bladder, and it can cause urinary symptoms, as we've already discussed. But in the long term, it can also cause prolapse. It can cause problems with the vagina, is it, and long-term dryness, painful intercourse. So there's a lot of problems there with the genital urinary system as well, and that actually happens more into the later stages of menopause. So we've talked about what menopause actually is. We've talked a little bit about the symptoms and the long-term health consequences. So what can we actually do to treat menopause? Well, if we look back a few years, there was a study called the Women's Health Initiative. And that study, excuse me, that study was actually misreported quite a lot in the media. And what actually happened was that there was a lot of scaremongering, and people were told that HRT was dangerous, that it caused breast cancers, ovarian cancers, that it was increasing the risk of various different factors, which in fact wasn't actually the case. When you break the Women's Health Initiative study down and you look at different age groups within the study, you can actually see that there is actually a huge benefit from HRT. And this has now been put out in the research, and it's been shown that in certain age groups, HRT is actually very, very positive, especially if started early. So if you start HRT early, you not only can alleviate a lot of the symptoms of menopause, but you can attenuate or stop some of the long-term health consequences, which is very, very important. And in particular, there we're talking about the cardiovascular consequences and the bone health in particular, stopping fractures and such like later on. So HRT is actually a very good treatment. Now, I am not a doctor, so what I'm telling you is for information purposes only, but HRT will come in pills, patches, gels, and vaginal only preparations. And you can get an estrogen only HRT if you have no uterus, if you've had a hysterectomy, for example, or you can have combined HRT that has estrogen and progesterone in it. And the progesterone is actually uterus protective. So if you are interested in HRT and you want to know some more information, I would suggest that you speak to a healthcare professional who should be able to help you. Preferably look for one who specialises in menopause, but there's not that many of them around at the moment. So to go on to foods that may help during menopause, there are a number of foods that can actually be beneficial for a number of reasons. Now, I always advocate a nice, healthy, balanced diet. So that would be a balance of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, lots of vegetables, particularly green leafy vegetables, and a good rate of protein, quite a reasonable to high level of protein. And the reason for that is that protein is a very satiating, but also protein is very, very good for trying to rebuild some of the muscle that you would lose. And it's also very helpful when you're in a calorie deficit, as you may be during menopause, for bone health as well. Now, I haven't talked much about weight gain during menopause. Weight gain is not actually a direct consequence of estrogen deficiency, apart from the fact that when you go through menopause, your fat deposition actually changes from your hips and your thighs, and it actually gets deposited more on your abdomen. So it can actually move from your hips and thighs up into your abdomen. So that's not necessarily putting weight on, but it's a recomposition. And a lot of women during menopause do complain that they put weight on around their middle. And this is because estrogen actually is responsible for the deposition of fat on your hips and your bum. And when that estrogen depletes and you no longer have the higher amounts of estrogen, it then moves to your abdomen and takes over more of a male pattern of fat deposition as opposed to the female pattern. Now, this male pattern of fat deposition on the abdomen is actually much more dangerous than the female pattern because fat around the abdomen is much more metabolically active. And that's one of the reasons why you're at a higher cardiovascular risk and also at risk of diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So the reason I'm talking about weight is because obviously I'm purporting for a nice balanced diet with high protein, but there are actually some foods that can help with symptoms as well as with weight loss. So weight loss, I would advocate a higher protein diet, plenty of green leafy vegetables, plenty of general vegetables, some healthy fats in there as well, so polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats. But specifically for symptoms, I would look at incorporating a lot of what's called phytoestrogens. Now, phytoestrogens are basically plant chemicals. They all come from plants. And there's two main groups that are very, very beneficial during menopause. And they are the lignans or the lignans and the isoflavones. If we start with the lignans, these are things like flax seeds, soya, rape seeds, whole grains like wheat, barley, oats, rye, legumes such as beans, peas, chickpeas, etc. And berries are very good as well, and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, etc. So those are the lignans. Now they have a mild estrogenic effect, but they also have very positive effects that research has shown on the cardiovascular system. So for a number of reasons, eating the lignans and putting the lignans into your diet is very, very positive. Now, the second group, the isoflavones, is the group that contains soya. So you have soya, lentils, beans, chickpeas, tofu, and tempeh, which are types of soya. And these are all mildly estrogenic as well, but they have a slightly more estrogenic effect than the lignans. You will also find a lot of isoflavones in a lot of the supplements, which I'll go on to in a minute, that you can buy to try and alleviate some of the symptoms. So the phytoestrogen portion of the foods is actually from the proteins. So it's another good reason to actually eat a lot of proteins. A lot of people think that you can only get protein from animal sources, from meat and fish, etc. But there are a lot of very good protein sources within the plant kingdom, and soya is actually the only complete or one of the few complete proteins. Soya and quinoa are two proteins that are complete proteins which you need in your diet. So soya is a very good one for a huge number of reasons. So we'll then go on to supplementation. So there's a lot of controversy around supplementation within menopause as to whether it actually works or not. So I'm going to split these into two different groups. I'm going to split them into the ones where we know there's research and that there is a definite positive effect. And I'm going to split it into the other group where it's talked about a lot. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but there's no actual research. So firstly, we'll talk about the ones that we know work. And those are the isoflavin group mainly. So isoflavins, as I've just said, contain soya, but there's also things like red clover, which is also an isoflavone, and there's black cohosh, which isn't actually an isoflavone, but it does have isoflavone properties. So those three actually have been proven and have research to show that they actually work with symptoms. Now, the main symptoms that they will alleviate are the vasomotor symptoms, which are the hot flushes and the night sweats. And what's actually been shown is that you can alleviate some of the symptoms, not the number of flushes that you have, but the severity of them. So you may still get the same amount, but they may not be quite as bad. So I'm going to go on now to the things that people talk about a lot, but aren't actually proven and have no research behind them. The first one being ginseng, and then we have oil of primrose, donkai, ginkgo biloba, sage, wild yam, St. John's wort, chasteberry, licorice root, and valerian. So these are all herbal supplements that are sold for menopause in a lot of cases. But as I say, none of them actually have any research or proof that they work. So I wouldn't waste my money on those at all. So that's hopefully given you a bit of an insight into what menopause is, some of the symptoms and long-term health consequences, medical treatments that are available in the form of hormone replacement. And then we talked about the foods that are very good for menopause for various different reasons to help with symptoms and also with weight loss. And then we've looked at the supplementations, the ones that do have proof and the ones that don't have proof. So that's everything for today in this video, and I am the Menopause Weight Loss Coach.